Video games thrive as part of a community. There's nothing stopping you from playing a game on your own, but you can gain so much from discussion with other people. Alternatively, you get into heated debates, and then arguments, and then many other problems. People take video games so seriously. When did this happen? I remember a time when we could set our differences aside and play Wii music. Was that a real thing, or was that just a dream I had? Don't drink before bed, kids. There's this common misconception that video games are intended to be deeply enjoyable experiences that unite persons both for their love of video games and working together in multiplayer environments. No, this is wrong. If you're not picking a fight with everything that moves, you're just not doing it right. Every video game community has its positives and drawbacks, but obviously some are significantly worse than others. Somehow the inner workings of certain games lead to this kind of unnecessary hostility that wouldn't be out of place on a United Airlines flight, and you always look for the silver lining out of some misguided effort to find the best of a horrendous situation, but it just doesn't really work. I kinda like the overly enthusiastic fan base, not so with the angrier communities. Video games are supposed to be fun, right? You'd think that a franchise becoming really popular can only be a benefit to it. Popularity leads to reliable sales, which means that developers give it a higher priority for future releases, and they can use the endless power of hype to drum up interest in it. For a lot of games, the idea of having a professional scene where people are paid money to know a game inside out is, like, the unattainable peak of popularity that few titles ever reach. Does it come with an upside? Yeah, sure, it can be pretty entertaining to watch, and it's nice that this level of skill is being rewarded. Unfortunately, in the case of Super Smash Bros., this kind of elitism spreads outwardly, and if you're not on board with how these games should be played, you can jump off a cliff. We all know the old adage of no items, fox only, final destination, which is generally used to poke fun at the serious nature of Melee's competitive scene, but it's not that far off. Maybe it's insecurity over whether or not Smash Bros. Can be considered a proper fighting game. Clearly it was made with that in mind and not, fun. The fun thing about criticizing the Smash Bros. Community is that your skill level at the game is immediately used in the argument against you. Which kind of sums it up really, but the good news is that I know I'm not very good at Smash. Luckily, you don't have to be in order to see how insular the community is. I don't think it's spread too much to other games in the series, but the fanbase for Super Smash Bros. Melee in particular lives in a bubble, and everything that isn't Melee or undermines Melee's qualities is the worst thing in the world. I remember when Brawl first came out, a game that had years worth of hype behind it was immediately shot down by Melee players for being slower and not catered to their very specific needs. It's one thing not liking a game, everybody does that. It's another to denounce its very existence for not aligning with exactly what you want out of it. I've always seen Smash Bros. As being on par with Mario Kart. Just a great party game to play casually with friends. I'd say that's probably intense enough for me. For the longest time, which considering that these videos take roughly a week to make is roughly a couple of hours, but for a decent while I had the Sonic the Hedgehog fanbase on here. There's a few reasons, some of which have haunted my nightmares for a few years now, but mostly it comes from a clash between two differing opinions about the franchise that aren't entirely compatible with each other. Sonic has had its problems in the past, but parts of the community are at odds over whether it's the 2D or 3D games that are the cause. It's a bit weird for there to be such a divide over two contrasting styles of the same formula. Kind of reminds me of a certain tactical RPG about fiery Emblerinos. Oh man, do you remember the Great War of Awakening in 2013 AD? Millions were slain in this pointless conflict that started when a company in the Far East, known to locals as Nintendo, released a new game in the reasonably hit series Fire Emblem. It did quite well, lots of people enjoyed it, and it helped to revive a franchise struggling for sales of a more mass-marketable product full of anime girls. The problem is that it created quite a big divide between new Fire Emblem fans and players who were around in the good old days of Genealogy of the Holy War, Path of Radiance, and Ruga wa Tseki wo Kurao. Both sides are fucking idiots because the praise of one side of Fire Emblem history comes at the cost of a complete disregard for the other. You can have your favourites, but the amount of hatred thrown at Awakening for dumbing down the series or all of the older games for being vastly inferior is so unnecessary and makes everyone look just a wee bit stupid. My personal favourite is Awakening, but I only bought that game off the back of working my way through the older games, and at this stage the only entries I haven't played are the super rare console titles. They're all pretty good games. Except Fire Emblem Gaiden, that game sucks dick. It's interesting that Nintendo have taken a few measures recently to try and reunite this fanbase. You've got Fire Emblem Heroes that features a wide variety of playable characters from a lot of games in Fire Emblem history. And I imagine that the Dynasty Warriors style game I think we're getting later this year is going to do something very similar. I'm sure over time we can learn to tolerate each other. You probably shouldn't get too hung up if someone likes a game, you're just making it harder for yourself. Usually I'd give this some kind of build-up before getting into the meat of what I want to talk about, but I've been playing Overwatch a lot lately under a variety of different circumstances, and I feel pretty confident in saying that it's one of the worst communities I've ever come across. That being said, it's still a community with an insane amount of positive energy and creativity, and it'd be remiss of me to ignore it in favour of reinforcing my point. But I'd argue that it's quite hard to have appreciation for all the great cosplayers and fan art when you're up to the neck in some of the angriest people you could ever meet. You know, I like this game, it's one of the best games I've played in the last couple of years, but damn, it can be hard work sometimes. Overwatch has exploded in popularity due to its ability to attract players from a wide variety of backgrounds, but as a result it seems to have picked up the worst parts of other communities that aren't necessarily compatible with each other. You've got the usual mix of throwers, trolls, AFKers, the occasional hacker, but add to that players who swear by a particular way in which Overwatch should be played, and it's a steaming, melting pot of shit. You try to play competitive and every other game will be characterized by players losing their minds over the tiniest things. Maybe because these games can be up to 30 minutes long, and if people aren't taking it as seriously as you might think that they're wasting your time. But there's a way of dealing with that doesn't involve hurling abuse at the guy who's picked Torbjorn or Hanzo or apparently Orisa now. Personally, I get by because I main Lucio, and you can't have a bad day when you're listening to that guy being so positive. All I'm after is that golden Lucio gun. Not too bothered what that does to my rank.
You fucking mentally kid, bro!
Why are you so angry?
The vast majority of video games are made of a certain demographic in mind. Well, before the ESRB rating was finalised, some of the games were a little bit up in the air, but usually you can look in the corner of the box art and see a little letter or number and get a decent first impression. I mean, you can give it to your kids anyway. I'm sure that won't ruin a community or anything. It's the question that's as old as time itself. Scholars have been debating it for millennia. Voyages have been carried out to forgotten lands in hope of finding answers. Would you be able to fix Call of Duty's community by removing the kids? You know, the archetypal screeching 12-year-old who's fucked all of your mothers, but not before he 360 no-scoped her. That's what attracted her to him in the first place. Mothers love a boy who can handle a sniper rifle. It's seen as the most valuable quality right after a steady income. So yeah, would taking the underage players away from the game help to make matches of Call of Duty a more enjoyable place to be? That depends on if people are always mature as they get older. I'll let you answer that one. The problem is that Call of Duty's qualities allow it to be a viable option for just about anyone with two thumbs, which in conjunction with the size of the fanbase at this stage, means that the vocal minority is actually quite large nowadays. The standard match from any Call of Duty game released in the last 8 or 9 years will have someone hurling abuse at someone else, and at times you wonder why anyone is here trying to play this video game. I think part of what makes Call of Duty in particular so bad is the kind of power fantasy you get back from it. Feedback is immediate and satisfying, which is a great attribute for a game to have, but it often leads to some players getting a little too carried away and believing that every headshot doubles the size of their penis. A little like Smash Bros in a way. If you're on the outside looking in, there's not a lot to encourage you to take part. I'm not even sure why these games have voice communications anymore. In 99% of cases, a bad community has very little to do with the game itself. There's a lot of reasons why certain people flock towards a game and make it harder for other people to enjoy it, but usually this isn't something that the game actively encourages. Riot Games never created League of Legends with the intention of making an experience that promotes toxicity, and yet there's something about this game that attracts the worst kind of people to it. It's hard to put your finger on it. I've never played it, so I'm still pure on the inside, but I've done my research and watched videos and I still feel ever so slightly dirty. Last game to do that was fucking Manhunt, and it's a bad day when a game is being compared with Manhunt. Did you know that it's always someone else's fault? Oh yeah, absolutely. If you're playing badly, don't worry about it. The best form of defense is a good offense, and if this doesn't work out in-game, make sure you enact this on your teammates. That'll paper over any cracks. League of Legends combines being a highly strung competitive game that requires a great deal of skill and game sense with being a free game that everyone can play if they want. In a way, this makes the amount of vitriol thrown about by players kind of, sort of understandable. Not relatable, since there's better ways of dealing with new players who might not be as good as you'd like them to be, but at least there's some kind of reason behind it. Doesn't make it okay though. And I think with League of Legends we get into what defines a toxic community. The reality is that that word carries a different meaning for everyone, and that every separate player will have a criteria that needs to be met before you can describe something as toxic behaviour. For some it'll be this torrent of abuse, while for others it'll be those who don't take a game they love seriously, which then impacts on their own enjoyment of the game. For reference, League of Legends has been the most popular game for Twitch streamers for as long as I can remember. It's serious business. You could say that both sides make sense, but one is using threatening behavior to stop new people from playing a game. And that's maybe the worst trait any game can have. This is Rabbidluigi, and I don't say this often, but I've absolutely no desire to play League of Legends in the future. I'm sure it has some redeemable qualities, but it seems like the type of game that takes more from you than it could ever give back. From what I've seen, it doesn't even look that interesting, so from a personal standpoint, I'd need a lot of convincing. There are games out there that provide resistance to the player. You can win at those. Have you got an idea that you'd like me to turn into a countdown? Let me know in a comment down below, and make sure you check out my Twitter, where I'll be turning the best submissions into a poll where you can then decide the best topic. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.